so many people put photos on their artwork, but like if I'm scrolling through a catalogue looking at podcasts, am I going to see a picture and think, oh, I'm going to listen to that podcast just because of the look of that person? Like, look at that person's face, I'm definitely going to listen to them. No, it's nothing to do with the person themselves.
Alongside the podcast title, you know, the artwork is the other thing that people can see. And as you said, it's important to have bold images because people are generally looking at this on a small grid, whereas, you know, side by side with other podcast artwork. I just like to get you, like, because the podcast artwork is so important, would you recommend that people work with a freelancer if possible, or try and build it themselves, or what advice would you give to people to get the artwork right? Because it is, again, something that's quite important.
Yeah, there's a few different elements to it, I think. I mean, I do think the best artwork is really simple. Often it can just be colors that match, you know, your brands, your personal brands. Come up with something that matches your personality, and then just big text and a nice background, maybe with a wee texture on it or something like that, or maybe a faded out image or something in the background, but mostly just text. And maybe an illustration that demonstrates what the podcast is about, if you can fit it in, or a photo of yourself. It's kind of gone out of fashion a little bit. The thing is with artwork, people who subscribe to your show, the artwork's not for them. The artwork is for the people who are just looking through the catalogue. So think about this, like, so many people put photos on their artwork, but like if I'm scrolling through a catalogue looking at podcasts, am I going to see a picture and think, oh, I'm going to listen to that podcast just because of the look of that person? Like, look at that person's face, I'm definitely going to listen to them. No, it's nothing to do with the person themselves. So a photo or something like that just kind of, it seems a bit pointless to me because it's not for existing listeners. So instead, it's about the text and potentially an illustration. If there's an illustration that can really explain, they say what a picture equals 1,000 words. If that's true in your case, if you can put on a picture or an illustration that explains a lot about what your show is about, the culture, the ethos, the whatever it is, then by all means include that. But otherwise, save the space for something that makes a difference. And what makes a difference is the message. It's the title. It's maybe a subtitle, if it's short, that explains a bit more about what the show is about. Our one, we don't necessarily go best practice with our main podcast, Podcraft. James, you mentioned it earlier. Podcraft is a slightly confusing name. At least pod is in there. So it's like explains the kind of, it's kind of default. If it's about podcasting, it's got a pod in it. And craft explains the fact that we consider podcasting a craft. It's about honing your craft. But we have a subtitle. So because the title's so short, I went with that because we could put Podcraft, honing the art of podcasting. And that's our subtitle. So all of that together is 5-6 words. So we can fit that on artwork really easily, nicely. So that's something there. Like if your title needs to be a bit longer, like it's the Clear Your Mortgage podcast, then that explains itself and it kind of fills up a piece of artwork. But if you can come up with one word which explains itself a little bit, and then you've got a subtitle, another 4 or 5 words that explains it even more, then that's fine. You can get away with that. But I'd argue that's what it's all about. Is it worth going into a couple of tools, James, that kind of make it easy to make them as well? You mentioned that.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. My favorite is Canva. So if you've not come across Canva, Canva.com. It's a design tool. It makes us non-designers feel like designers because you can make someone really cool looking with no effort whatsoever, basically by stealing their templates. So you can get in there and they've got tons of typography templates. They'll give you a nice background, some textures, some shades. You can put in a few free photos and things like that in the background just to give it a little bit of a nice professional look, but then put a nice typography template on the front of it, which has the name of your podcast in it. And I think they've even, I can't remember for last time I looked actually, but I think they might even have some podcast artwork templates in there for you to use. So if you customize them a little bit so you don't look like just any other one out there, that can be perfect. And that's free as well. If you pay a little bit, it's not very much to pay the pro one, and you get extra templates, more photos, all that kind of stuff. It's actually, we use it all the time. So I pay for the pro one, no worries. But that's a good starting point. If you're going to do it yourself, use Canva, keep it simple with text and a background. But yeah, freelancers as well, like you mentioned, James. We use Fiverr, actually. So Fiverr has got a bad reputation in some respects, kind of cheap outsourced work, but there's some really good artwork creators on there. And these days, Fiverr is not just a Fiverr. Like, you can pay $50, $100, $200, whatever it might be, and get really good designers. And you can look through their portfolios too. So actually, if you want to get somebody else to do it, by all means, Fiverr's a good option these days, I think.
Yeah, definitely. There's a few things you touched on just as you were mentioning there. Obviously, if you're using the templates on Canva, I haven't seen those yet, but they do have templates for pretty much everything. So I wouldn't be surprised if podcast artwork has made its way in there. You mentioned, obviously, it's important to differentiate your artwork to make sure it's not the same as, the exact template, but it just also reminded me that we should have touched on when we were talking about names. I see a lot of duplicate podcast names, and I think if you're coming up with names and you've settled on a name, then you want to go to Google and you want to have a look and see, does this name exist? Because if there's another podcast that's quite big and well established, you're going to be setting yourself up for a very difficult time, and it's just not the right way. So it's just a quick check that you can do if you have got a name that you're happy with. But I think all of the advice you gave there was really good. I like the point you made about the photo of yourself, and the artwork is probably not the best use of space. I think the only case where that is not applicable is if you're a celebrity and you have a massive following and people recognize your face. Has, there's a reason to use your face on the artwork then. But for the vast majority of the rest of us mortals, I don't think it's the best to put your own face in the artwork.
That's worth qualifying, actually, in terms of most of this advice actually can change if you have an existing audience. Like, it's a very different thing if you have a blog right now that has 1 million visitors a year, or a social media, like if you're a YouTuber or a Instagram account with like 100,000 followers, then it's a very different prospect launching a podcast. So nearly everything we're talking about here applies to people who are kind of starting afresh, trying to build a new audience based on a podcast, a new blog, a new social account, that kind of stuff. So yeah, we could certainly go into some of the other things related to if you already have an audience, but I think we're probably talking to the new podcasters, the new audience builders here, aren't we, James?
Yeah, I think that's the vast majority of people out there. It's great that there are people who have an existing audience, but it's harder to do, I think, if you're starting and you're from square one, you don't have an existing audience.